Oh, hi everyone, Michelle Yachmanev. I'm the UAA Alaska Native Education and Outreach Executive Director. But how I'm involved with IARPIC is I'm an IARPIC STEM team member, and then also I'm also the Indigenous fellow at IARPIC, and have just really enjoyed my connection here and involving the work that I do at the university. So it's been really great. Our focus among the STEM team in terms of these quarterly meetings and our partnership with the Pillar team has been to focus on indigenizing STEM education. And so that's why we asked Skyler to be here today. Skyler Kern is a professor here at UAA as well. And he's been working on a great project that he'll talk about. And it's talking again about trying to indigenize STEM education, whether it's at the pre-college level, the college level, and so on and so forth. So thank you for being here today, and I'll turn it over to Skyler.
Yeah, I will go ahead and share my screen, and then we can get started. So you all can see my presentation, right? Okay, perfect. So yeah, as Michelle said, I'm Skyler Kern. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering here at UAA. And this project that I've been working on has been with the support of the Concord Consortium. So Carolyn is also here in the audience. There's people like Joy and Nathan Kimball who have also contributed a lot. And so just, calling out my collaborators. But I'm going to start by kind of introducing the motivation behind the project. I'll then kind of hit on like the curriculum that we've implemented to cover coastal erosion in these rural communities using a multi-perspective approach that's sort of aimed at developing a holistic understanding that incorporates Indigenous perspectives, as well as, engages students in sort of the Western science understanding of things. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we're seeing students using the curriculum, which is completely online. And so really the project kind of starts with a couple key, things that you have to recognize, right? One of the first things is that there is this deep relationship between Alaska Native communities and the ocean and the environment in which they're living, right? This is an environment where, they go for sustenance. It's also one where, they've as we pointed out a little bit earlier, right? They've been stewards of for a very long time. And as part of that process of being stewards, right, they've developed cultural traditions, and they've also a deep knowledge of those processes. And so we have to recognize that, there are things that they know, and that knowledge needs to be preserved and brought into whatever education we give these students in terms of broadening their understanding, not replacing it, right? And so the other thing is to understand that there is a general approach to seeing everything as being connected instead of dissecting everything, right? And so trying to understand things more systematically and holistically has been a big motivation for this, right? Because that is a part of the more Indigenous perspective of things versus the Western science perspective, where you look at a very specific issue and you go very, very deep as far as you can, understanding a very particular part of it, right? So the project has also been sort of organized around three key values. One of them is recognition, respect, and responsibility. So these come from the government of the Northwest Territories in how they approach Native communities and the sovereign Native nations that they have to engage with, right? But we've adapted them for our particular project, where we're trying to encourage this in the students a recognition and awareness, or we're trying to, in terms of recognition, bring awareness and wonder to their connection to their coast, right? Trying to really reinforce that value that's already there. Encourage the development of respect, right? There is generally in Indigenous culture this great respect for the environment, for non-living things. And so we want to, provide support for these communities that want to develop those values within their youth. And then the final thing is responsibility, right? So we've kind of hinted at this point already, but like, you know, these communities have and do see themselves as stewards of the environment, right? And so there's a certain level of responsibility that they feel for their environment and their habitat and their home and those that live in their vicinity, right? And being respectful of those relationships. And so this is all meant to sort of not replace those, but support those things. Okay. The other thing is there are a number of like science standards that we are trying to hit on for these students, right? And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be trying to get them to see processes and changes, right? So that's all related to this idea of the coastal erosion. Have them analyze and interpret data, so making them go out and actually monitor things, look at things, do things. A big part of this is going to be having them use models and analyzing and interpreting data. And then also this idea of like this cross-cutting concepts is an important one, right? Where we're, again, trying to get them to have a more holistic view of things, thinking about things in terms of systems and how things connect overall, instead of looking at very specific, ideas. Yeah, one thing I will highlight, right, is that there is this idea in the science standards of evaluating competing design solutions, right? And a lot of the times we take a very analytical or a very like technical view of how we rate different solutions, right? But we also need to incorporate, and this particular project does a good job, I think, of allowing also the Indigenous perspective to come into how we're evaluating these designs, right? What does the community want, need, and how do they view things that are happening? And so this kind of, I think, provides an avenue for broadening some of those things. On that note, we are also trying to incorporate some of the Alaska cultural standards in science education, right? So Alaska has identified essentially these cultural competencies where students are able to bring their knowledge and ground their learning in the cultural knowledge that they have, right? And use that as the avenue for developing further. And so this tries to encourage also the development of not just the scientific pieces of this, but the cultural elements of it as well, and be culturally knowledgeable students, right? That are able to take their culture and bring it into this new field. Okay. And so essentially putting all of these pieces together, right? The coastal environment, the cultural perspective, understanding things as a system instead of as very particular pieces, using models and evaluating solutions. We're trying to take all of these and have the students do these. And we're going to do this through an investigation of coastal erosion mitigation techniques with multiple perspectives, right? And so this multi-perspective is going to be doing things that are like monitoring their beach, understanding waves, but then it's also going to be talking to elders, trying to get them to engage with both the traditional knowledge and the community knowledge that is there for them to draw on, and trying to get them to value both of those equally. Okay. And so the question is going to be, how is the curriculum implemented? And so basically there's a number of different like approaches to education that we've tried to use to inform how we develop the thing. One of them is going to be reflective learning. So the whole curriculum is going to be contained within a portal online, or it's all kind of centered around this portal, right? But then they go out and they do things. And so there's the portal itself, we call a logbook, which encourages reflective learning, okay? And then there's a number of activities which they do both in the portal and then outside the portal, which are meant to be active and experiential, right? So really like getting them to do things and not just reciting things or like reading things, right? They're doing something and learning as they do these things. And so as you know, I've kind of hit on a number of times, right? We are trying to provide an avenue for them to also bring in cultural practices and perspectives, right? Both by talking to people, like emphasizing the value in certain conversations, but also in actual activities that we have them do. And I'll hit on some of those as I go forward. And then one of the big pieces of this, right, is because of all of the elements that we have them do, the curriculum ends up being very place-based, where it's all oriented towards their communities, and a lot of the activities are centered around monitoring things that is their beach. And there's a lot of possessiveness put on these things, where it's not just a beach or the beach, right? It's their beach. So the outline of the curriculum, basically in lesson 1, we ask the students to start to tell the story of their beach by like saying what their experience with the beach is, going and having them talk to people and start to collect the different perspectives of their community on the beach. We then ask them to monitor the beach in lesson 2. So this is going to be them out there measuring things and then bringing back and analyzing that data. We then have them learn about waves and the impact of waves through computer simulations, and then also using a wave tank. And then in the last part, going back to this idea of recognition, respect, and responsibility, right? We have them do some sort of final project where they are meant to sort of tell the story and take on that piece of responsibility of like what can be done, and how, and communicate what they've learned to their community. So I'm going to hit on a lot of these different elements. The first thing is the reflective learning. So the reflective learning is really accomplished through the use of this portal, which has been designed as a digital logbook. And so this is kind of based on the idea of having a lab notebook in a science class, right? But it basically serves as a way of us going, or a mechanism for us to ask them to reflect on the things that they know, what they wonder, and then at the end, what they've learned by going through the curriculum. And so the setup of the logbook, sorry, you can see here where essentially there's this piece where they're able to use a graphic interface, right, where they can upload images. There's also a drawing capability or a annotation capability, right? So they're able to upload a picture, write a caption, and then at the bottom, they're able to like leave some note. So like, and this isn't like an actual student response, just to be clear. But like an example could be like, "Ooh, I wonder what my beach will look like when I'm 80." And so this is how they can engage with it, right? And how we try to get them to be reflective as they go through this process. A couple things to point out is that students can type their responses, but we also have speech to text and voice recording capabilities. So if instead of like typing out things, right, they want to do those other mechanisms, those are available to them, which is important because in some of these rural communities, the reading and writing levels can be like slightly below other places. And so the goal is really to like enable them to still engage with the curriculum and like reduce the barriers wherever they may come up with, or wherever they may come up. Yeah. So the other thing, as I've kind of pointed out, is that we are trying to get them to engage a lot with traditional ways of approaching knowledge and communicating what's happening, right? And so some of the activities that we have them do include the story knife activity, where basically they're asked to sort of draw out what the story of their beach is, what happens at their beach, what's happening to their beach. And so this is a UPIC tradition where essentially storytelling is a big part of the different cultural traditions, right? And then in UPIC tradition, what they would do is use a stick to like draw symbols, draw pictures in the sand as they're telling a story. It can also be used as a game. So like they would draw pictures and then people would have to sort of guess what the story is or what the word is or whatever. And so having them sort of use that, what may be traditional to them or what may be familiar to them, and like re-engaging that in a new context of like, what is the story of your beach, is one way that we do this. Another way is having them sort of reflect on the cycle of the year, right? The yearly subsistence calendar, where we have them sort of fill in what are the things that happen throughout the year. And this sort of emphasizes, right, that the system approach of like everything's connected, but also like the cyclic nature that a lot of people or a lot of cultures kind of emphasize, where you go from summer to winter and something happens as you move through the seasons, right? Not necessarily thinking of things quite as linearly as we do in some Western perspectives. The other piece that we do a lot of is like recognizing the knowledge of the community, and so trying to show that it's valuable and that it's like important to listen to and consider, right? And so there's a number of places where we introduce like interviews with elder, where, for example, Bosco Olson, who's senior from Hooper Bay, who's an elder, talks about the connection between his people and the coast and the ocean. Sophia John, sorry, who's an elder from Newton, Alaska, talks about like her experience in the past, living in a village, right? And essentially how things are different from her time, right? And so there's other things that we include, like Nelson, this is a video from the Action for Climate Emergency, who like posted a video from Nelson from Kupnik, who talks about like the effect of flooding on his community and his experience with that. And then the connection between their life and the ocean is shown through, for example, the walrus hunt video, where a student talks about their experience with their first hunt of their first time hunting seals, and sort of emphasizing like the connection that they have with that environment. And so the main lens that we kind of think about as connecting the Western perspective and the Indigenous perspective is this systems thinking approach, where traditionally Indigenous groups often see everything as interconnected. And then the systems approach is a way of sort of like viewing the connections between everything, right? And so it sort of provides a bridge between the two perspectives, and allows them to start to connect things. And one of the activities that we have them do is sort of build out a system. So here is an example of a graphic interface where they're able to sort of move around components and sort of draw out what they see as connections, and how things relate to one another, and really try to develop that understanding of the different pieces, right? And then once they kind of get this idea of everything being interconnected and being a system and being composed of different systems, right, we try to give them additional context for some of the individual pieces, right? So what are waves? And then how does like sea level rise versus waves affect the way that they interact with the beach, right? Thinking about those things sort of together. So as I said, in lesson 2, what we ask them to do is go out and monitor their beach. And so this is, again, this idea of having them do things, be active learners and learning through experience, right? And so students actually go out to their beach, they take observational data using the Emory method, where basically it's thought of as like 2 sticks in a string, where you separate, or where you basically measure the difference between the height of the 2 sticks at like a given distance that's always the same, right? And using that data, you're able to plot the shape of your beach. And so then once they've collected their data, they're able to upload it onto the portal and measure or look at the profile of their beach, right? And so it's important to sort of let them look at historical data, so that way they can see the trend of what's happening to their beach over time. But then also the fact that they are the ones that are going out and measuring their beach, and that they're reproducing the same results as a researcher from the University of Alaska Anchorage, who's the one that sort of collected the original data, I think builds up confidence that, you know, like, oh, I'm doing the same thing as these people, right? And so it's important for that confidence piece of it, that developing ownership of it piece. Yeah. And then this is also related to the place-based nature of it, right? Where they're able to measure their beach and then compare results to historical data from, again, their beach. So it's not just some random, you know, profile from somewhere else in the world. So kind of sticking to this idea of experiential learning, active learning, and then the place-based nature of it, we basically have them do like learning about waves using models first, and then these models first introduce the general concepts of waves, like amplitude, wavelength, frequency, using a string model, right? And so then you're able to, in this case, like send waves through the thing, and then you can look at how they interact, right? And then once they sort of develop some understanding of like what is frequency, high frequency, medium frequency, low frequency, what is amplitude, high amplitude, low amplitude, right? In terms of waves in general, then we again allow them to like look at what happens when you have waves at your beach. And so you can see in the lower model, right, what they're looking at is you know, sending waves towards, you know, a profile of their beach and looking at how those things interact. And then they're able to look at different conditions, like what is the summer, you know, what happens in the summertime where the water is, I don't remember off the top of my head, like higher or lower, right? But that red line goes up and down. And then right now it's set to storm, which is higher, right? And so then you have more impact as a result of the water being higher and the water being able to reach farther up the beach. And so then they're able to sort of, again, engage with these things and really, you know, test out different conditions and see what's happening. Okay. And so we kind of have them repeat some of this in the context of like in something that's more tangible, right? So in the first case, we're using models. In this case, we're still using a physical model, but now the model is a wave tank. And so, you know, they're first do some activities with the wave tank in terms of trying to develop a standing wave, trying to again see what happens like when you send a wave through the water and how those things happen, interact, right? But then again, developing this into a like place-based and really making it like applicable to them. They then build their beach in the wave tank using sand. I don't know to what extent you can see this, but you might see over here on this edge, there's a profile of a beach, and then seeing essentially what happens as you send waves to that beach. Does it erode, or do you get buildup? What happens? And then, you know, we also try to get them to understand this idea of waves being the transfer of energy and not necessarily the motion of particular molecules, right? And so this is something that's really interesting because they're asked to create Cartesian divers, which are essentially like you know, little kind of like buoys, right? You essentially have to get the Cartesian diver to float. And so that's one activity that they do. And then once you have a Cartesian diver that floats, right, you can put them in your wave tank. And as you send waves, right, you see the Cartesian diver kind of rotate, but he doesn't, or they don't like move towards the beach or away from the beach, right? Because it's not the fluid moving, it's the energy being transferred through the water. And then another big part of the project has been including to the best of our ability Indigenous languages. And so there's a number of terms that are important for the lessons, including things like in this example, right, anything underlined, beach, waves, future. And so all of these are things where the student is able to click on And if the language is turned on, it defaults to the native language, which is one like conscious and important decision that was made. And so basically what they're able to do is provide some definition or leave some sort of comment. And then once they've left a comment and reflected on what they think the word means, they're given an actual explanation. And so I included the English example here so you can see what this looks like, right? So if I put in waves are water in the ocean moving, I can then click submit, and then I get the actual description of what it is. And so again, it's this idea of putting things as much in their context and making it as relevant to them as possible. One thing that we can point out is that if, not everything that we have a word for in English has like a corresponding word in the indigenous languages, right? And so even if that's the case, some phrase or some like description of the thing that we're referring to is included there, right? Okay. So I'll talk a little bit now about basically how students are engaging with the curriculum. I'm going to kind of highlight the fact that this is still initial data. We still have students going through the curriculum. And so really what I'm going to look at now is how students are using the logbook. And then in the future, we'll try to look at really what the students are learning and taking away as we get the final and complete sort of data set that we'll be looking at. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is essentially how they're utilizing sorry, this should be the logbook, but the logbook features, right? Which are they using the graphic submission, which is that top part where they can draw a picture, or they can like leave an image and a comment, right? Or are they only leaving text submissions at the bottom? Or are they doing both, which is really kind of how we intend for them to interact with it, right? And you can see that initially, like a large portion of them use both the image or graphic part of it, and then the text part of it. And sort of as you go through the different reflective questions, what do I wonder about or what do I know about my beach? What do I wonder about my beach? What I know about my community, and then what do I wonder about my community? You can see that more of them rely only on the text submission, right? So they kind of do the graphic stuff early on, and then later on, they're just kind of answering the question of, what do I wonder? And so I also looked at basically the content of what they're submitting if they're submitting a graphic submission, right? So is their graphic submission a picture, a drawing? Is it some combination? Is it only an annotation? And so you can see that, a lot of them incorporate pictures, and then, slightly fewer do pictures. And then in all cases, these are kind of dropping off as they're going through the curriculum, right? The one thing to note is that annotation is used a lot by itself. And that's because some students, the way that they're actually interacting with the profile is instead of like using the text boxes, they'll just like put an annotation there and then they'll write their response in the annotation. And so that was kind of an interesting thing to see in terms of how they're interacting with the logbook. I also looked at like how they're using the logbook or the graphic submissions in terms of like individual submissions. So I'm not going to go all the way back, but if I was to go all the way back to the page where I showed the graphic submission, you might notice that essentially they can make multiple graphic submissions where they can upload a picture and then they can go to another submission or another like win option, and then they can draw a picture in that one. And essentially each of those can be considered like a different submission. And I looked at essentially how are they submitting things. And so, the vast majority of it seems to be pictures with, with some submitting drawings, but the pictures tended to be the favorite. And then again, annotation does make up a fair portion of it because the annotation tool is how some students are submitting their text responses. And then I looked at essentially the source of their pictures. And so in the graphic window, we give them the option of choosing pictures from a preloaded gallery. And so then essentially they can just select one of these images. They're also were given in some classes essentially access to a Google Drive where their teacher had pictures for them to choose from. And then in some cases, I was able to identify them as coming from the internet. And then there's some portion of them which I can't necessarily account for, but the vast majority of them are coming from the selection of pictures that we have provided from them. And so I looked at sort of essentially the content of the pictures just to see if there's any like important trend in it. And you can see that, as you might expect on a like essentially a project related to, you know, coastal erosion or the coast, right? A lot of the pictures are focused on either the beach or the ocean, where you know, in a lot of times cases the picture has both the beach and the ocean, but I tried to like sort of break it out into which like makes up the majority of the picture. In some cases, they included things like infrastructure and community, to a lesser extent, right? And then in a few cases, there was some indication of like animals. This mostly happened in the cases where they drew pictures. So they would like draw jellyfish or they would draw fish as something like in the ocean. Okay, and so you can see essentially like a set of the pictures that are available to them in the gallery, and you know which of these pictures that they used. And so the one that came up the most is this picture of what I labeled the ocean. Okay, and then just this is kind of to get an idea of the coding, but essentially this would be the ocean, right? And then any picture that has a person in it, I labeled people. And then something like 6 would be more like the beach, where it's focused not as much on the ocean, but more on the beach, right? While 7 would be like centered on the community. And so that would fall in to that category. But essentially there are a number of these pictures which were used multiple times. Okay. And so going forward, as we look towards completing the project, there's we're really trying to answer the question of like, what are students learning? And so, yeah, we'll be able to answer this better as they've completed the curriculum, and we're able to look at these reflective questions of what do you know, what do you wonder, and then at the end, again, we are asking them, what did you learn, and sort of comparing those responses in order to like identify, you know, where they were and where they have ended up through the course of this. Sort of more generally, we think that there's like 3 questions that are kind of important for the community to sort of think about. These include what are ways that students make sense of coastal erosion, drawing on both community and or science knowledge. The other questions are like, does providing opportunities for the collection and sharing of community knowledge lead to holistic understanding, right? And so these are questions that we hope to be able to address once we understand what it is that students are taking away from the curriculum. And then the final question is, how does including community knowledge along with the Western science influence student learning experiences and approaches around coastal erosion? Yeah, and so that takes us to the end of the presentation. I should acknowledge that this is all funded by a project from the NSF. So thank you for your attention. And let me know if there's any questions.
Thanks, Skyler. So just note that if you have a question, you can certainly type a question in the chat and we'll kind of read those out. You can also click the react button and then there's an option to raise your hand there, or you can just come off mute as well and ask questions or share thoughts, comments. And Julie, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Skyler. That was fantastic. I'm working with some 2 communities, and your idea, what you're showing me, is very inspirational. One question I had was, you got two schools. What is the duration of the module? I mean, like how many weeks are you in the community, or is it a week? And the other thing is, what about the season? Because clearly maybe September has got to be it, September and not even May. So what, could you elaborate on the number of days, the weeks, and then the season? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the way that it's structured, I mean, one thing is this curriculum is meant to be something that the teachers can sort of take and adapt to their classroom. So they're kind of able to like pick and choose which components they really want to emphasize and how long they want to spend on it. But the sort of recommended duration, I'm forgetting off the top of my head. So maybe Joy or Carolyn can like chime in, but I think it's basically like 15 45-minute lessons.
Skyler,
It's-
correct. That's correct.
yeah. And, you know, ideally, they don't also have to do this all at once, right? So as you mentioned, the timing of it can be super important if we're having them go out and measure their beach. And so the goal has been to sort of have them implement early in the fall, so that way they can get out to the beach. But the way that most of the timing has worked for these communities is they actually do it more towards the end, late in the spring, just because, you know, school. So
Okay, and the teachers are receptive to adding this to their curriculum.
yeah, most of them sort of see the value in it because of, you know, the relevance of it to the communities that are participating.
Thank you.
I see a question in the chat from Benjamin. Did you want me to read that for you, Skylar?
Yeah, can you?
Yeah, it says thank you. And then they were curious about Indigenous knowledge that you referenced and it being co-produced with Indigenous people. And so specifically, how is Indigenous knowledge meaningfully engaged in the process rather than being interpreted or adapted to fit in this framework?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is that we don't necessarily try to like provide the like Indigenous knowledge to the students. What we try to do is sort of provide a mechanism and like a framework for them to like seek the Indigenous perspective. So there are things like those videos where we're trying to, you know, show that this knowledge is like both valid and important to consider by, you know, incorporating it into the curriculum. But a lot of what we're trying to get them to do is actually like talk to their family, talk to their community. We try to encourage the teachers that are doing this to, you know, have the elders come to the classroom and talk about things or join them when they go to the beach, right? So it's not necessarily us trying to like provide the Indigenous perspective to them and interpret it through any particular lens, right? We're trying to just provide a framework where these things can be incorporated in a way that works for the community and the, you know, class that's sort of going through the curriculum.
And I think too, there's also Indigenous STEM professionals incorporated it, whether it's in leading some of the creation of the modules and then also on the advisory board, which includes Skylar, who is Indigenous, and myself, who is also Indigenous.
Yeah. Well, I stop sharing. So.
And it looks like Carolyn has added, you know, and the students are also encouraged to tell their story and reaching out to their elders, their parents, and the community members. So similar to what Skylar said, it's incorporating that knowledge within their circle.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, I think the big things are like, trying to develop those things related to recognition, respect, and responsibility, but like trying to get students a sense of ownership and, confidence in their ability to confront these things, right? Both in the context of their beach and their story and what they know, but also like what are solutions and what are the solutions that will work for their communities.
There's another question from Tracy. Do you have a goal for the number of classes the program will be piloted in or with?
Yeah, so right now we have 2 communities that will be going through the curriculum. Yeah, we've had other communities that have participated, but currently right now the ones that are doing it there's 2 of them.
And I believe that's the goal, and then to help reach other communities.
Yeah,
And once research is over, we are going to release the curriculum, so it will be public for all to use.
It looks like Anne has a question for you.
Hi, guys. I just want to recommend that you also consider putting it on the website for Adapt. Is it Adapt Alaska? Alaska Adapt or Adapt Alaska? Through who's the lead for that? That is it Olin? Meredith, do you remember? From AOS, I mean from Sea Grant, CBIS Sea Grant? Do you know what website is I'm talking about? Because all the coastal erosion stuff we've done, we've sent to him to post. We have lesson plans and activities we've done over the years too. Anybody recognize? Yeah, right. Thank you. Adapt Alaska.
I think that might be, yeah.
There's a lot of resources already on there about this topic, including some of our stuff. So just an idea.
We'll definitely take a look at it.
Yeah, and I see another note from Ben about the Cook Inlet Tribal Council has a Fab Lab STEM department that might be interested in partnering. So another connection there. And I know Ann Garland and Ann Gibbs, I believe, were both on a call or a meeting yesterday where we were discussing coastal or natural and nature-based solutions to coastal erosion and projects getting started there. And so I'm sure you all have connections to some of those projects going on. But yeah, to me, it seems like the more students and people starting to think about those types of solutions for their community, the better.
Yeah, we actually have student monitors that are, it's actually a family. Well, actually a couple families that are leads on our Tundra Green Engineering project. So yeah, we try and get them totally engrossed. They've been doing erosion measurements for years, and now they're exploring how to do nature-based stuff too.
Yeah, Lisa.
Hey, thanks for that presentation. That was really interesting. Are you planning to follow the students? I know that's difficult, but to see if they take science in the future when they go on to in their career, or is there any chance of that happening?
I don't think there is any plan for that right now. As Carolyn kind of mentioned, the project will end sort of this summer, and then that's sort of like the end of it. So the long-term effects of like engaging the students in this kind of curriculum isn't really within the bounds of what we're looking at for this project.
Yeah, it's really difficult. So I was just curious, but it looks like they're very engaged.
I don't know if you guys want to continue working on the curricula with students, but if your funding is over, what, in this year, 2 years?
This summer, June 30th.
Okay. So what we decided to do, because it's very hard in North Slope Borough to attract teachers to implement curricula during the school year. So we went to using the Boys and Girls Club in the community. And so we do stuff every summer, activities, we do lesson plans about different things that we're doing with the studies we have up there. And yeah, just recommend that you might seek that out. I don't know if you could get funding for that, but it seems to be a lot more consistent that way than just, you know, one pilot study and then it's hard to get teachers involved again.
So
And
in
that's
one of the communities that we've been working at or with Hooper Bay, they do have a summer school. So we have worked with them sometimes during the summer.
That's good. Great.
I've got one more question. I was so impressed with having the different modules with different language. Do you do that yourself, or do you have an elder help with getting the language right?
We've worked with
You're obviously Indigenous yourselves, so I just curious, that's a real advantage for you. And but that looked like a really wonderful idea.
We've
So
worked with both languages with translators that are educators that team up with other members and they actually review their work together.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Thank you.
I'll leave a minute here for people to think of final questions. It looks like there's another one from Ben in the chat asking for email addresses to connect further. I also put some information in the chat about an upcoming meeting on February 5th that the Coastal Resilience team is hosting that might be of interest to some folks in this group. And yeah, I won't keep us on if there aren't any more questions, but I also want folks to have space to gather thoughts. So if people have more questions, just unmute, ask them. And if not, I will start to close this meeting and thank our presenter, Skyler and Michelle, for organizing.
Yes, thank you, Skyler and Michelle, and we're really grateful. And also, we hope to hold these sorts of events every quarter or 3 times a year. That's what our goal is. And so we hope that you'll come back and join us at a future event. Thank you.
Yeah, and I see Ben's working on a question about data management and sovereignty. So I will certainly give you a second to gather that question.
I think he stepped away or something, but
Oh.
it just says it's at the bottom. Give me a second. So and then you could be thinking about the response to that. Is it planned right now that you don't keep that data? Oh, here. It's in the chat now. How does your concept of data management address Indigenous data sovereignty? Specifically, what possibilities do you see for ensuring that data generated through this work remains under the control of Indigenous communities and reflects their priorities and cultural contexts?
I'm not too sure how to respond to that one. I mean, most of this is like student data, and so it's not necessarily like data that can be shared or posted anywhere. So a lot of it is maintained sort of on secure servers, right? Controlled by or maintained by the Concord Consortium, right? And so, I mean, a lot of it is really just there to protect student identity.
And we de-identify the students.
Yeah, any data that's like included for the research, right, is de-identified, and then the data that is like the user data is all maintained by the Concord Consortium, and again is there to like protect their confidentiality and making sure that none of that is, you know, distributed anywhere.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry. Sorry, my camera's over here, my screen's over here. No, let me clarify and rather expand upon the question. Rather, what do you see as possibilities for the concept that you've developed as moving forward and expanding outside of education? Because I really love the idea.
You're referring to like
Well,
expanding the user
rather
interface?
the platform for collecting data. And then what do you see the possibilities of that expanding outside of education? And how do you see that? Or even Michelle too?
But I think the curriculum we've developed is like very focused on how do you teach middle schoolers about coastal erosion in this sort of culturally relevant way, right? And so like that piece of it will probably remain like a very education focused, right? You could think about like ways of sort of taking the concepts behind the curriculum and broadening it in terms of like participatory science or something. But I don't know that that's something that we've thought about, or I haven't thought about until just like 5 minutes ago when I think Anne was talking about her stuff, right? Where I was like, oh, you know, this might be an interesting way of engaging. You know, I think community science is a big push now. And so, you know, there might be avenues of doing it that, but I think the Concord Consortium's like portal itself is very self-contained. And so, you know, using their infrastructure, everything would like have to remain on their stuff. But you know, there's definitely room to collaborate with them and like set priorities based off of what the community wants. So like there's ways of engaging with them. I don't know to what extent, which Carolyn, you might be able to talk about, the Concord Consortium does like education very specifically at students, or is there more broad possibilities in terms of using your platform?
Benjamin, we're a nonprofit and very dedicated to open source. So we have reached out to many different levels of education, and we have worked with some engineers and some biologists recently, especially around some of the moth research that we've been doing and we are open to working with anyone that would want to use this platform. When Skyler says it resides on our servers, we also do release the code. So if someone else wanted to use it, they could, and we would help them in any way.
And I think too, the teachers have access to each of the individual students. And I think one way it could be shared with the communities is maybe at the end, sharing that information with, the group of elders or the community, as a presentation about here's what the students found, and that information could be shared with the community so that they can take that and keep it going or work with it further.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the curriculum, like the whole lesson 4, is having the students tell the story of their beach, right? And so there is that piece where they are meant to like give a presentation, tell a story, create a dance, create a song, however they want to express that story in a way that's relevant to them and like hits on those sort of principles. So that part of sharing what they've learned is there.
Yeah, thank you again for your presentation. I do really appreciate it. Maybe we could connect outside because it looks like it's 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
I got your email, Michelle. Maybe I'll email you and then you could forward it to Skyler and Caroline. Maybe I'm interested in talking with you guys.
I could also put my email in here really fast.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your attention and your questions.
Thank you, guys. It was great.
Yeah, thanks
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Skylar.
you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.